I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old Oscar Countdown. This is the third episode of the week where I'm going to be giving my predictions on what I think will win the Critics' Choice Awards, the second bonus episode of the week. Usually we only do the one on Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, but we're in the thick of things now. Oscar nominations are going to be happening soon. There's all these award shows, Golden Globes we've just covered, SAG we've just covered. Now I'm going to give my predictions on what I think is going to win at the Critics' Choice Awards. You guys have been showing a lot of support during this really important time of the year, leaving your comments, letting me know your thoughts. Please do continue to do that. I love to see it. I love to hear your guys' rationale and your comments. It's always great to see. And subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on some of these bonus videos. And as always, what I do in my videos is I put timestamps in the description below. So if you just want to see my predictions, just take a look. They're all there. Or if you want to jump around to see what my predictions are for a certain category, you can jump to the specific part of the video where I give my thoughts on that category. So that's what we're going to be doing here. Not super in-depth for each and every category, but giving my predictions, giving my thoughts on every single one with some reasoning as to why I picked that one, sometimes over, say, another obvious pick. So I've got my predictions here. We'll go and forward with things. Starting off with Best Picture, I went with Anora. Even though it underperformed at the Golden Globes and completely blanked out, I think that's still a separate awards body group. Critics' Choice have already started voting, so there are going to be some people that haven't been influenced by the Golden Globes whatsoever. And I do think that when you look at the total number of critics groups, they've been majority going for Anora as the best picture. So even the Critics' Choice isn't always a collection of some of the LA film critics or New York film critics, but they are still critics at the end of the day. And if we just tally up all of the wins for best picture at all the other kind of big festival wins or kind of critics groups, Anora is leading. And historically, Critics' Choice will always go with the movie that has the kind of lead in those critics' prizes. And this year it is Anora, so I think they're going to go with kind of the basic frontrunner, which still I would say could be Anora, could be The Brutalist too. It's a really tough kind of a balance to hit there, but I think ultimately they will go with Anora. Best Director, I went with Brady Corbet for The Brutalist. Critics' Choice have actually been very accurate in recent years at predicting the Oscar winner, so I think they're going to try to keep that same streak going forward and go with Brady Corbet, which after the Golden Globes win, I think cemented himself after a couple of good speeches at the Golden Globes as the frontrunner. He has the more ambitious film in this use of 70mm film and it being on a small budget, and he kind of really championed himself kind of as a director, in particular for his film drama speech, talking about kind of championing for that final cut and positioning him as kind of like an artist trying to get something done in the same way his main character in the movie, Laszlo Toth. I think there's some connections he sees himself within, definitely. And, they've been ones to go with some weird off-ball choices like a Bong Joon-ho or Sam Mendes, but they've been pretty accurate for the past 8 years in a row now predicting the eventual winner, so think that they're going to kind of follow suit. Brady Corbet is the betting favorite to win. The Critics' Choice Awards usually predict the one that's going to win, so I went with a kind of chalk pick here, and I went with Brady Corbet. Then for Best Actress, I went with Mikey Madison for Anora. I am kind of betting on Anora once again in this awards group. I think if you're going with Demi Moore in this category and maybe something else for screenplay, let's say the substance in screenplay, you probably shouldn't go with Anora for picture. But I also think that if you're predicting, Anora for Best Picture, it should have a screenplay win. It should have at least one acting win. That's what most Critics' Choice Award winners usually have, even in weird years like 2019 when Once Upon a Time in Hollywood won for Best Picture. It still had, a Brad Pitt, for example, or a screenplay when it had some wins. So take a look at your Critics' Choice Award predictions. Make sure that everything makes sense. And for me, because I have Best Picture, I felt like I had to go with Mikey Madison for Anora. I would be strange for a world where she loses and then the movie wins for Best Picture. And then ultimately I did go with Mikey Madison because she does a lot in the movie. And when we see Critics' Choice winners in the past, they usually go with the performance that is the biggest. Demi Moore has a strong narrative and has kind of her own bigness of a performance, but Mikey Madison has to go from, seduction to being emotionally vulnerable to really silence to over the top and swearing. She has to kind of swing in these kind of major directions of comedy, of drama, of loud, of quiet, of intimate, of huge. She has to do a lot. And when we look at Critics' Choice Award winners, they're often those types of performances, the bigger performances, the more obvious performances. And I think that kind of leans a little bit more to someone like a Mikey Madison rather than a Demi Moore, although Demi has her own kind of an argument in the bigness, particularly at the end of the movie. It is for stretches of the movie almost a silent performance, so you could go with that, but I think Mikey Madison is the more obviously bigger type of performance, and like I said, because I'm going with picture for Anora, Mikey Madison made sense here for actress. Then for Best Actor, I went with Adrien Brody for The Brutalist. I wanted to maybe try to predict an upset here to make things interesting, because I don't think of this category as particularly locked down. Yes, Adrien Brody won at the Golden Globes, but I could see Chalamet winning at SAG. And, last year was a similar situation where, Giamatti was kind of similar to Cillian Murphy, and then they split the acting prizes. So I wanted to go with an upset here, but frankly, I couldn't make an argument for either or. I didn't think Chalamet would win here because if he didn't win at the Golden Globes, I don't think he's going to win at Critics' Choice. The Golden Globes are a little bit more favorable to those musical-type performances. Taron Egerton, Rocket Man, Rami Malek, Bohemian Rhapsody. Whereas Critics' Choice Award didn't give it to Rami Malek. They didn't give it to Austin Butler, for example. They're not as willing to go with you sang as a real person? Okay, we're going to give you the award. So I don't think they're going to go with Chalamet here. Then the other competitor would be like Ralph Fiennes in Conclave. But this is ultimately the Critics' Choice Awards, and if we look at the critics' scorecards of other critics groups, Ralph Fiennes has done pretty poorly. Like, at least you could say the argument last year with Paul Giamatti, he had a similar number of nominations and wins as Cillian Murphy before Critics' Choice Awards, and then ultimately, Paul Giamatti won last year. But this year, it's not even a competition. I mean, Ralph Fiennes has 4 wins, I think, and Adrien Brody has like 16. Or 14. Actually, the number 1 competitor is Coleman Domingo for Sing Sing, so that could surprise and happen, but that movie has been a little bit decreased in its Oscar chances in recent weeks, so I wouldn't want to go with that. So I wanted to go with an upset, but none of them made sense, so I just went with the boring chalk pick of the movie that we know they liked, that has is kind of essentially tied for the most number of wins at other critics groups, and is in itself its own kind of a big spanning years type of large performance that the Critics' Choice Awards, the obvious performance that they like. So I went with Adrien Brody. Then for Best Supporting Actress, I went with Zoe Saldana for Emilia Pérez. This was a tough one to suss out, but ultimately went with Zoe because Ariana Grande lost out, actually, at the Golden Globes. If you take a look at recent history, the Critics' Choice and Golden Globes, in particular for the Best Supporting Actress category, almost always lines up. I remember in the one weird year in 2020, it split with Jodie Foster and Maria Bakalova, but that was a COVID year. If you don't include that year, you have to go all the way back to 2015 when you had the split with Kate Winslet winning. So, but for the most part, even in years where like Angela Bassett wins at Critics' Choice and Golden Globes and then doesn't win at the Oscars, Critics' Choice and Golden Globes are pretty aligned because they are around the same time when they give out their awards and when they're voting on it. They kind of align in terms of what's the clear front runner in a certain category, for example. And right now, that's Zoe Saldana after her Golden Globes win. Emilia Pérez slightly underperformed in terms of nominations, but not crazily. And I think the fact that Ariana Grande lost at the Globes, a group that actually appreciates more of those singing type performances over someone like a Zoe Saldana, who also has the benefit of being singing. You could say Critics' Choice kind of like the comedies. They are a little bit more favorable to comedic performances, but I think ultimately Emilia Pérez, after the support of Golden Globes and the general well-likeness of Emilia Pérez, should kind of propel her and catapult her to win. But it is a tighter race than I think a lot of people think. Just because Saldana won Golden Globes doesn't mean she's an absolute lock, but does give her the edge. Then Best Supporting Actor, I went with Kieran Culkin for Real Pain. This is the only lock acting category of the night. I thought he did a good job at the Golden Globes in terms of his speech to not ruin anything, and is a seemingly charming and likable person outside of the film, so I'm sure he's done very well on the campaign trail, and they've really been campaigning this movie. And A Real Pain got nominated for Best Picture here, which it hasn't in a lot of other places, so just another sign that they actually really like this movie. I'd be surprised if Kieran Culkin doesn't win. Best original screenplay, I went with Anora. This is tough because they don't really have consistency between like a creativity-based idea screenplay or a dialogue, witty, funny screenplay. Sometimes they'll go with, A Promising Young Woman, which is an interesting idea, but then another year they'll go with like an American Fiction, which is more so not necessarily an interesting idea, but more like a dialogue-focused, witty, smart, great writing on the page type of a screenplay. So tough to say right now. But ultimately, I went with Anora because I'm predicting it to win for Best Picture, and it does have some of those funny, wittier dialogue moments, rather than a movie like The Substance, which has the benefit of being like this really unique, original idea, but maybe is not as heavy on the dialogue, which I think the critics will more appreciate in a movie like Anora, but really interesting to see. Best Adapted Screenplay, I went with Conclave. It just won at the Golden Globes. The movie overperformed in terms of nominations. The Critics' Choice Awards group definitely like Conclave, so it definitely should win here for Adapted Screenplay with not a lot of competition. Then for Best Film Ensemble, I went with Conclave. This was a tough one because every movie has something against it. Usually they go with the movie with the most stars, which I guess would be like an Emilia Pérez or a Conclave, but Stanley Tucci didn't get nominated for Conclave, and then Selena Gomez didn't get nominated on the Emilia Pérez side. So then you could say, okay, Wicked is the only of the ensembles that didn't have like a quote-unquote snub. So ultimately the way I looked at things was Conclave and Wicked are kind of two frontrunners, maybe with a Sing Sing as an underdog, but Conclave and Wicked just because those are the two movies with the most nominations, so we know they like those movies. In terms of number of stars, you may give a slight edge to Wicked over a Conclave, so it has that side, but Conclave I think is a stronger Best Picture movie in terms of it's more well likely to win Best Picture. And then also what I did was I looked at all my predictions and I went, at one point, only had Conclave winning one prize. That's kind of weird because if you look at the movies with the most nominations every year, they always overperform. Barbie had 18 nominations. It wins for like hair and makeup and surprises there. The year before that, Everything Everywhere All at Once overperformed, winning picture and director after losing out at the Golden Globes. The year before that, Belfast, if you remember, overperformed in young actor. It got in for screenplay. I don't think a lot of people predicted that. It also got in for this category, Best Film Ensemble. So because Wicked and Conclave had the same number of nominations, Wicked has a slight edge in terms of more number of stars, but Conclave, based on the subject matter of the film, I think has more of a cohesive ensemble, whereas Wicked I would describe more so as like a two-hander between Ariana and Cynthia, versus Conclave, it is the cast, it's everybody, it's all those different popes. Conclave made the most sense based on the content of the film and the fact that it had the most amount of nominations and the fact that I was looking at my predictions and I'd recommend you do the same. If Conclave only has one win, this movie got the most nominations. That would be historically different to what past heavily nominated movies would get. Usually if you have the most nominations at Critics' Choice, you're winning 2-3 awards easily, so I wanted to give Conclave at least a second one. Best Young Actor or Actress, I went with Elliot Heffernan from Blitz. Really tough category to predict, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but the thinking ultimately was, when you look at past winners, Gabriel LaBelle, Dominic Sessa, even Jude Hill, you look at the movies they were in, Belfast, Holdovers, Fabelmans, these were all strong movies. So they usually go with the kid performance in the movie that they liked, or the movie that's most likely to get nominated for Best Picture. And of this group, I don't think any of them are going to get nominated for Best Picture, but if I were to pick a movie, Blitz is probably going to get nominated. Maybe there's a chance for like 1 or 2 nominations. There's no chance for Dee Dee to get nominations, or My Old Ass, or the actors from those movies. So ultimately I went with the performance in the movie that I think is the most well liked, and for me that was Blitz, in this case Elliot Heffernan. Then for Best Comedy Movie, I went with A Real Pain. This should be a lock. It is the only of the movies nominated in the Best Comedy Movie category to also be nominated for Best Picture, so theoretically it should win, even though this category can be a little bit wonky. Although I do think it still fits into the terms of the traditional mold of it's a very funny movie and there's very funny, witty, laugh-out lines, so it should definitely qualify. This is always a weird, sporadic category most years, but I can only predict one that makes the most sense, which is it got nominated for Best Picture, and it's the only one of the best comedies that got nominated for Best Picture. It should also win in this category. It doesn't always work that way, but that's all we can do is predict it and follow the process. Best Animated Feature, I went with The Wild Robot. This is because this group very rarely goes with the indie movie. The Golden Globes, they'll go with, Flow a couple of nights ago, or they'll go for The Boy and the Heron. They'll do some weird stuff. In years when the Golden Globes will go with The Boy and the Heron, Critics' Choice will still go with the mainstream movie. They'll go with Into the Spider-Verse. They've rarely pretty much given an award to a smaller animated movie. Flow may have the kind of juice behind it, but right now I'm going to go safe and I'm going to go with The Wild Robot because it is the mainstream Hollywood American animated movie with the most well-liked appreciation, so went with it here. Best Foreign Language Film, I went with Emilia Pérez. We can be short on this one as well. It is the only of the nominees that also got in for Best Picture, so theoretically it should make sense and get in. Best Cinematography, I went with The Brutalist. Tough category to kind of suss out, but ultimately they've been pretty accurate for the most part at predicting the Oscar, so I wanted to kind of consider what was the frontrunner to win Best Cinematography at the Oscar, which for me is The Brutalist or Nickel Boys. And as a matter of fact, Nickel Boys won the National Society of Film Critics Award for Best Cinematography, and they are historically inaccurate. They'll choose a lot of weird movies like The Green Knight, for example. So the fact that the Nickel Boys won in that group indicated to me that Critics' Choice is going to do something different and go with the kind of the mainstream, the obvious choice in the case of The Brutalist. And when you think about the movie, you think about the visuals, you think about the 70mm, you think about the Vista Vision, the uniqueness of its photography. I think the critics will want to reward that rather than the kind of slightly more edgy pick or interesting pick of going with a movie like Nickel Boys. The Brutalist is a strong Best Picture contender that also looks pretty incredible, and so much of the press has to do with how it was filmed, with adding just, I think, a greater emphasis to people watching it to notice the cinematography. So I think the Brutalist should be the front runner here to win. Then for Best Costume Design, I went with Wicked. This category, for the most part, really leans towards fantasy over period. Last year going with Barbie, even though more of a period type of costumes and Poor Things won the Oscars. Same thing, with Black Panthers, both Black Panthers winning, Cruella winning. They really like the kind of fantasy costumes in this category, so I would expect Wicked to win here. And then Best Production Design, I also went with Wicked, and I went with it because actually Critics' Choice often overlaps their winners between production design and costume design. Sometimes in years like, a couple years ago, it was Babylon winning for production design, and then it was Black Panther 2 winning for costume design. That makes sense to me because those two movies weren't super strong Best Picture movies. They were getting a couple of nominations, but not, 8 or 9. And when a movie has 8 or 9 nominations, like a Mad Max Fury Road, or like a Barbie, or like the first Black Panther, that's, contending for Best Picture and is a big technical blockbuster achievement. Usually they win both categories. When we split these categories, it's more so like a Babylon or a Black Panther 2, where they're not as well liked, so they kind of split the categories. But when you have a big kind of technical blockbuster that has interesting costumes, interesting production design, it usually will get in for both categories, and I expect the same thing to happen here for Wicked, particularly because it got 11 nominations. It was a very well liked movie within this group. It should win some Critics' Choice Awards. I have some of the technical stuff here for costume design and production design. Then for Best Editing, I went with Conclave. This is my big, bold prediction of the night. Usually they'll go with some weirder picks. They're not really that accurate at predicting the Oscars. I remember First Man or Baby Driver or West Side Story. And I wanted to go with something a little bit different. I could have gone with Challengers. I think that's a smart kind of a sideways prediction. But I was looking at a year, and I thought this year was very similar to 2021, as a matter of fact, where the West Side Story beat out Dune. Now, that made sense. Dune eventually won the Oscar because at the Oscars, they like length. They like movies that are just really long, and those are the movies that usually win. Whereas Critics' Choice like noticeable editing. They like fast-paced editing, which is why West Side Story ultimately won at Critics' Choice Awards. So I look at the list here and I go, I'm pretty sure The Brutalist is not winning here, just because it's long. That's not really the type of editing award that the Critics' Choice historically has liked to reward. So to me, it was like Challengers is probably the clear frontrunner to win. But then I also thought about, okay, well, Conclave is a noticeably edited movie at times, and just how intense it is, how tense it is, and how it moves forward that pace in this really tight time frame. Oftentimes movies with like tense moments or tension get appreciated for the editing. I wanted to choose an outside pick. I thought this made sense because you're looking at Challengers and Conclave. Challengers maybe has a little bit more in-your-face editing, but both are kind of noticeable editing, except one is nominated for Best Picture. So I think they like Conclave more. And going back up to my point I mentioned earlier, usually the movies that get the most nominations overperform at Critics' Choice Awards and surprise in certain categories. I think Conclave is going to win here and surprise in the Best Editing category. Watch out for that. I think it's a smart long shot pick. Best hair and makeup, I went with The Substance. This was a movie that they also really well liked that I haven't given any wins to as of yet, so I thought this would make the most sense. It has lots of prosthetics, which we know this category in recent years has focused towards. Less, makeup or interesting hairstyling as it is how much prosthetics have you done in the movie and do they look convincing and realistic. In this case, maybe not realistic, but definitely involved, and they really enjoyed this movie and gave it a lot of nominations, so they should like the kind of intensity of the movie, and a lot of that has to do with the makeup, in particular with the connection between Demi Moore's character. Then for Best Score, I went with Challengers. I think because of its most recent Golden Globe win, it kind of gives the Critics' Choice group the green light to also give it the win. Like the Golden Globes, the Critics' Choice Awards very much so like Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, nominating them for 2 other scores that didn't get ultimately nominated at the Oscars. So like the Golden Globes, they like this group. They like Challengers. I mean, it got in for Screenplay. It got in for even the song that also got in for the Golden Globe. So I actually think both groups see the movie similarly, which is maybe not good enough to get in for Best Picture, but still a really good movie. And the movie's got a really noticeable score. So because the Brutalist and Conclave are kind of battling each other out for like the really well-liked movie with solid scores, Challengers can kind of come through and be like, we're a liked movie as well, and we've got a really noticeable score, and we've got the benefit of the people that did the score you really like. So I think Challengers here is a sneaky good pick in terms of almost a borderline lock. I really feel confident in them winning for score. Then for Best Song, I went with El Mal from Emilia Pérez, kind of following suit from what the Golden Globes predicted as well, and the kind of decrease in appreciation for The Wild Robot, so I don't think they're going to go with the song there. I think actually if there is going to be a surprise, it's going to be the song from Will and Harper and Will Go West, because that movie did very well at the Critics' Choice Awards for the documentaries, the Critics' Choice Documentary Awards. They really like that documentary, so maybe if there is an outside shot, they'll sometimes go with the funny or the different song. They went with I'm Just Ken last year, so they're more likely to go with the bolder or the more funny type of a song, which Harper and Will kind of Go West is, rather than a more traditional song like an El Mal. But I still think that they'll kind of follow suit with the Golden Globes and go with El Mal. And then my final prediction is going to go in the Best Visual Effects category. And I'm going to predict Dune Part 2 is going to win. They nominated it in a bunch of categories, so you would think that they like the movie. I don't have it having any other wins right now, so I wanted to give it something. And when we look at past winners, they don't give it to Black Panther 2, or they don't give it to Poor Things. Movies that they liked that had kind of shoddy VFX or really noticeable VFX, what they did was actually give it to movies like 1917 or Dune. So I think because they appreciate, or even Oppenheimer last year, they appreciate the kind of more subtle, more well-integrated VFX that you don't even notice are VFX, rather than, let's say in Wicked, a talking character that, is fake. I think they'd rather appreciate like, oh, well, that's a really cool ship design that I know is fake, but actually feels really well built within this world, and go with a movie like Dune 2. It should make sense for visual effects, but maybe they really love Wicked, so they give it the win here. But I think just based on their history of the types of visual effects, not really talking animals, it's more so like how well integrated it is into real life, which is actually a little bit closer to Dune. But that's it. Those are my predictions for the 2025 Critics' Choice Awards. Let me know your predictions in the comments down below, or if you have any arguments with what I've got presented. But that's about it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another video coming, should be Monday. And yeah, until next time, stay tuned.